The northern reaches of Yellowstone National Park, near the Montana-Wyoming border, are some of the most breathtaking and least forgiving stretches of wilderness in the continental United States. Towering lodgepole pines, deep mist-filled valleys, glacier-fed creeks that tumble cold and fast through ancient stone. It is a place that demands both respect and caution. In the early summer of 1992, the season had come later than usual. Snow still clung to the highest ridgelines in June. Elk moved low across open fields, and grizzlies, recently emerged from hibernation, had been spotted near backcountry trails. Rangers issued warnings, closed off several footpaths, and advised hikers to keep to map zones. Douglas Keane, 50 years old, had spent most of his adult life in these woods. He was a senior backcountry ranger for Yellowstone, known for his calm demeanor, encyclopedic knowledge of the terrain, and habit of jotting meticulous notes in his field journal. A former geology student turned conservationist, Keane had patrolled the Lamar Valley and Mirror Plateau for over 2 decades. He was not a man easily startled or easily lost. On the morning of June 12, 1992, Keane checked in at the ranger station near Tower Junction. His log sheet showed he planned to inspect Trail 17B, a section that had been recently closed after 2 hikers reported a bear encounter. The trail was remote, only accessible on foot, and ran parallel to a section of steep ravines known for unstable ground and old, unofficial mining paths long since abandoned. At 8:04 a.m., Keane signed out a handheld radio, extra bear spray, a thermal blanket, and a water purification kit. He carried his usual gear: field pack, compass, wax seal maps, a handheld cassette recorder for audio notes, and a metal strongbox he used to store sensitive documents, mostly for weather readings and environmental samples. He hiked out alone. The first hour of his patrol was uneventful. At 9:27 a.m., Park Dispatch received a standard check-in. His voice was clear, calm. "All clear past marker 5. We'll continue to Ridge Loop," he said. At 10:06 a.m., Dispatch attempted to contact Keane again. They received a burst of static, then a short clip of muffled breathing, a fragment followed by what sounded like a single word: interference, and then nothing. No further communication. Initially, there was no panic. Radios in Yellowstone often dropped signal in deep valleys or near rock formations. It wasn't uncommon for rangers to go dark for a few hours, especially if they were navigating areas with poor transmission. But by early evening, when Keane failed to return or respond, the concern turned to alarm. By midnight, a full-scale search was underway. Over the next 72 hours, more than 40 searchers, including rangers, rescue volunteers, and a K-9 unit from Montana, combed over 15 square miles of rugged backcountry. Helicopters swept low across ridges. Ground teams followed game trails, riverbanks, and former mining roads. They found nothing. No broken branches. No discarded gear. No signs of a camp or rest stop. By the end of the week, the search radius expanded. A deep crevice near Badger Ridge was explored by climbers. Nearby cave entrances were mapped and inspected. Wildlife specialists analyzed whether recent bear activity could account for an attack, but no signs of blood, torn clothing, or predatory behavior were discovered. Douglas Keane had vanished. For his fellow rangers, it made no sense. He knew these paths better than most. He had taught backcountry survival to recruits and never took unnecessary risks. His field manual, still on file at the station, was filled with protocols for situations just like this. The theories began to grow. Some believed he may have slipped on loose terrain and fallen into a ravine. Others speculated that a sudden bear charge had caused him to flee, lose orientation, and possibly collapse from exposure. One ranger suggested something more unusual, that Keane had begun investigating illegal activity in the backcountry. Rumors of hidden mining sites, long abandoned during the early 1900s, had persisted in hushed tones among rangers for years. Occasionally, signs of recent disturbance would appear: flattened grass and odd formations, cigarette butts in remote areas, even engine tracks where no vehicle should have been. Keane had mentioned it briefly once over lunch. He told a fellow ranger that someone's been moving to the old line above Blacktail, referring to a disused ridge path above a former mining corridor. At the time, no one followed up. By August of 1992, the case was still open but inactive. Keane's family, his sister in Boise, a cousin in Cheyenne, refused to declare him deceased. His belongings were boxed and returned to the station, except for his personal locker, which remained sealed. The forest had given no answers. Years passed. His name faded from daily logs, but never from memory. Rangers who had worked with him kept his photograph in the office hallway. A weathered wooden sign bearing his name was placed at the trailhead where he was last seen. Every now and then, a hiker will report something strange, an old boot print, a rusted canteen, or a faint trail marker carved into bark where no recent ranger had walked. But each lead ended in silence. Then, in late spring of 1999, a new team arrived. A group of wildlife biologists from the University of Wyoming was conducting an extended study of bear denning behavior along the Mirror Plateau. They planned to survey abandoned dens, those no longer in use, to collect data on nesting patterns, environmental wear, and diet indicators from soil composition. On June 3rd, 2 graduate students came across what appeared to be a partially collapsed den, its entrance obscured by fallen branches and loose earth. Located roughly 5 miles from where Keane's last transmission had originated, the den sat on the side of a slope between 2 shale outcrops. They began to excavate carefully. At first, they found only animal debris, old bones, for fragments, claw markings along the stone. Then one of them spotted something strange. A human-made object, a boot, mud-caked, waterlogged, partially torn along the seam. They uncovered the second boot less than 2 feet away. Both were standard-issue Ranger field gear, and stitched inside the tongue of the left boot in faded black ink, D. Keane. The discovery of Douglas Keane's boot stunned the research team. Word spread quickly from the university field group to park authorities, and within hours, a joint team of rangers and forensic investigators was flown to the site by helicopter. The location was remote, difficult to access even with modern gear. Dense tree growth masked elevation, and large rocks surrounding the den created an optical illusion. From above, it looked like nothing more than a sloping cluster of stone and moss. The boots had been found just under the surface, pressed between layers of moist earth and decomposed plant matter. Their condition, soaked, misshapen, partially deteriorated, suggested they had been buried for years. Still, the stitch name was unmistakable. Douglas Keane. The excavation continued over the next several days. Teams worked slowly, carefully brushing away sediment and silt from the den's entrance and surrounding area. They uncovered more debris, fragments of fur, broken animal bone, pieces of wood, and crushed insects that had long since perished in the seasonal collapse of the den ceiling. But then came something distinctly human. Buried just beyond the boots, beneath a layer of compacted clay and pine needles, was a rusted metal box, rectangular, heavy, scorched faintly on one side, as if exposed briefly to heat. The latch had fused shut from corrosion, but the seal was intact. Park authorities identified it almost immediately. Keane's personal strongbox, the same one he had checked out from the station on June 12, 1992. It took over an hour to carefully pry it open without damaging the contents. Inside were 2 wax-sealed maps, one field notebook wrapped in plastic, and a small black cassette recorder, the model commonly used by rangers to dictate environmental observations while on foot. No money, no ID, no survival kit, but it was what the items showed that reshaped the entire case. The maps had been hand-annotated in pencil, not standard park markings, but custom trails and symbols drawn with methodical care. Areas were circled in red and blue. Some trails were labeled Old Cut, Suspected Wash, and Unlisted Shaft. At the top of one map, Keane had written in all capital letters, "Follow noise zones, mining equip, The implications were immediate. For years, rumors of illegal mining activity within the northern reaches of Yellowstone had existed only in whispers. The park sat atop vast geothermal and mineral-rich territory. While all commercial extraction had been banned for over a century, the sheer scale of the land made complete surveillance impossible. Keane's notes hinted he'd found something, or was close. In his journal, scrawled across several pages, he had described hearing distant metallic sounds beyond Ridge 9B. He wrote of rattling at night, like a bucket being lowered, and diesel smell near the stream bend shouldn't be there. He suspected the sounds were from below ground, the remnants of old mining tunnels reactivated for clandestine use. Even more telling, Keane described choosing not to report his suspicions over radio. One entry read, "Signal unreliable. If someone's in there and monitoring, I'd rather not announce location." He mentioned photographing equipment, but no camera was ever found. The final journal entry, dated the same morning he vanished, was incomplete. It simply read, "We'll circle back along ravine edge. If no contact by 1400, mark trail and review tapes." And then a line below it, scratched hastily in ink. "Area near 7B. Not natural. Marked with wire. Will inspect." The cassette recorder held more. Rangers played back the tape with headphones, letting it run for nearly 20 minutes. The first part was routine, notes on erosion patterns, elk tracks, and cloud movement. But about 10 minutes in, Keane's tone changed. His breathing slowed. He whispered, "I see light. Very faint. Not fire. Looks like reflection." A few seconds of silence followed, then static, then the faint sound of gravel shifting, and then, "This doesn't belong here." The recording ended with a loud pop, possibly a drop or a strike against stone. The team reviewing the audio froze. There had been no official reports of excavation, power use, or equipment in that part of the park during the 1990s. And yet, Keane had described light movement and an impression of human activity in a zone marked unmaintained on federal maps. Could he have approached too closely? Was he spotted? Theories reignited. One possibility. Keane stumbled upon something illicit, perhaps not just miners, but organized operations operating deep in Yellowstone's hidden corridors. Another. He had documented too much, and someone decided to intervene. Of course, without a body, nothing could be proven. Still, the box, the maps, the audio, they told a story. And the boots? Their placement was strange. They weren't tossed or scattered. They had been placed side by side, soles flat, toes pointing inward, almost as if they had been deliberately set down. One investigator noted it quietly. "No bear does that." The den itself had collapsed naturally, likely years earlier. But its proximity to the zone Keane described, and the fact that none of the gear around it showed signs of animal destruction, raised new questions. Had someone used the den to conceal the evidence? Or had Keane himself hidden it, hoping to retrieve it later? Back at headquarters, investigators reopened the case. They cross-referenced Keane's maps with old geological surveys, looking for alignment between his markings and pre-1900 mining claims. They found two matches. One, less than half a mile from the den. The other, still undisclosed. To the public, the National Park Service issued a brief statement. Previously unknown evidence was recovered near the last known patrol zone of Ranger Douglas Keane. The investigation is ongoing, but to those who had known him, who had worked beside him, learned from him, walked those same trails, it was confirmation. He hadn't wandered. He had followed something. And he had been right. By midsummer 1999, the discovery of Douglas Keane's boots, box, and recordings had shifted his case from a long, cold disappearance to an active federal inquiry. Officially, the National Park Service maintained a neutral stance. But off the record, among rangers and investigators, the working theory was clear. Douglas had encountered something he wasn't supposed to see, and it had cost him everything. The metal box and cassette had been handed over to federal authorities. The U.S. Forest Service and Department of the Interior quietly assigned 2 investigators to cross-check Keane's notes with archived land use records. These were not modern electronic files, but hand-typed entries dating back to the 1880s, documenting mining claims, trail permits, and topographical changes long erased by time. And yet, the deeper they searched, the more one truth emerged. Much of Yellowstone's backcountry, particularly the northern expanse near the Mirror Plateau, remained barely mapped and barely governed. It was easy to vanish out there, even easier to hide. Douglas had sketched what appeared to be an old route, not listed on any park-issued map, that ran parallel to the Raven Spine, a thin line of elevation once used by mule caravans during the brief gold rush of the 1860s. His annotations showed breaks in the terrain that had been covered by erosion or plant overgrowth, but when satellite images were enhanced with thermal overlays, faint irregularities appeared. Long, narrow lines in the earth, where temperature retention differed from the surrounding forest floor. In short, underground space. Possibly tunnels. Possibly something more. The fact that these anomalies existed exactly where Keane had circled suspected shaft and diesel traces gave the investigation new urgency. But the trail was old, and time had not been kind to evidence. Investigators turned their attention to the only other object recovered from the den, the field journal. Despite the weathering, many entries remained legible. Douglas's handwriting was neat, always in block letters. He wrote like someone who believed what he saw needed to be preserved exactly. No guesswork, no dramatics. Over the span of 3 weeks before his disappearance, he'd logged 3 separate encounters with fresh tire tracks in restricted areas. 2 sightings of unknown individuals walking with equipment near dusk. Not rangers, no ID, one carrying tubing. Multiple notes on disturbed soil near creeks, as if small-scale pumps had been used. One audio recording he labeled inconclusive, which had yet to be found. What stood out wasn't just a detail. It was the restraint. Keane never accused anyone by name. He never speculated wildly. He documented. Quietly. Carefully. As if even then, he wasn't entirely sure who he could trust. That raised a troubling question. Had he told anyone? A deeper look into station logs revealed that Keane had filed no official incident reports tied to mining or trespassing. But junior ranger named Caleb Rowan, now working in Idaho, had once been assigned as Keane's assistant for a short 2-week rotation in late May of 1992. He agreed to speak. What he said changed everything. Caleb remembered that Douglas had taken him off-route one day, just briefly, to inspect what he called a possible trench shift. It was a shallow depression near a tree line north of Trail 7B, with no obvious source. When Caleb asked what it meant, Keane just nodded and said, "It's either old or active. Either way, someone was here." Later that day, they'd spotted reflected debris in the sunlight, tiny fragments embedded in the mud. Not glass, something else. Caleb described them as shavings, maybe from metalwork. Keane collected them, but never said where he stored them. The next morning, Keane asked Caleb to stay behind while he returned to the same area alone. Caleb didn't see him again until sundown. He looked different, Caleb said. Not shaken, just distant, like something had shifted in his head. Keane never mentioned the trench again. When Caleb heard about the disappearance weeks later, he'd felt a pang of guilt, one that had never quite left him. But without clear evidence or knowledge of what Keane had been tracking, he had nothing to offer at the time. Now, his story added depth to what the journal and tape had hinted at. Keane was investigating something, deliberately, and very much alone. Meanwhile, the site where the boots had been found was re-examined with advanced scanning equipment. Ground-penetrating radar revealed something subtle beneath the rock formation west of the den, a collapsed cavity, possibly man-made. Initial probes indicated it extended at least 12 feet, with offshoots to the north. If it had once been a mine shaft, it was now sealed by decades of sediment and forest activity. Still, the implication was clear. Keane had stumbled onto an illegal zone, possibly active, possibly occupied. That alone would explain his caution, his secrecy, and perhaps his disappearance. But something else complicated the picture. DNA testing on the boots and box confirmed Keane's biological material. Hair, sweat residue, and skin oils were present. But a secondary profile was also found. Partial, male, not in any federal employee database, which led to a chilling possibility. Someone else had handled his belongings after the fact, possibly placing them in the den, possibly to hide them, or to leave a message. Rangers began to speak of it quietly, not to media, not superiors, but to one another. Was the placement of the boots deliberate? Had someone wanted them to be found, but not too soon? The bare den, long abandoned and partially collapsed, would have remained hidden indefinitely had it not been for the biologist's research project. It sat perfectly between known patrol paths, a no-man's land of stone and silence, and the boots had not decayed the way they should have in open wilderness. Someone may have preserved them, protected them. That theory brought investigators back to one last object, the cassette tape. It had been rewound, not to the beginning, but to the final minute. Whoever left it behind, if anyone had, wanted that part to be heard first. The part where Keane said, "This doesn't belong here." The part where the tape ended with a sharp, metallic thump. A final moment, preserved, replayed, waiting. As summer waned and Yellowstone slipped into the soft gold of early autumn, the investigation into Douglas Keane's disappearance continued, not as a public case, but as a slow, quiet movement beneath the surface. Much like the wilderness itself, the truth remained buried, obscured by time, by weather, and perhaps by human hands. The turning point came from an unexpected place. In September 1999, a park maintenance crew was clearing a trailhead sign near a disused footpath north of Raven Spine when one ranger noticed a strange square of discoloration beneath a layer of moss on a fallen log. It wasn't natural. When they peeled back the moss and lichen, they found what looked like a laminated page, warped, nearly fused with the damp bark. It was a hand-drawn map. The lines were sharp but faded, made in pencil, with notes in block letters. The markings matched the handwriting from Keane's field journal, dated June 10, 1992, just 2 days before his disappearance. It detailed a route he had labeled Alt B, which curved well off any existing trail system and looped behind the section of forest where his boots had been found. Several points were marked with numbers and symbols, including a circle with the letter X and a note beside it. Unmarked shaft. Sound below. Return with equipment. Park authorities were notified immediately. Using GPS coordinates estimated from the drawn terrain, they launched a new search, not for a person, but for an entrance. It took 2 weeks, 5 specialists, and a team of climbers to locate the opening. What they found was not dramatic, not a gaping mine shaft or iron-gated tunnel, but a narrow break in the earth, camouflaged by fallen trees and overgrown ferns. From a distance, it looked like nothing more than a shallow pit. But once cleared, the opening revealed a vertical shaft descending roughly 15 feet. Rusted metal rebar jutted from the sides like crude footholds. At the bottom, a partial wooden platform had collapsed into muddy debris. It was not natural. Inside, they found remnants of old tools, a rusted pickaxe head, a tin flask, a section of rotted canvas tarp, all weathered by time. But something else was buried deeper in the debris. A second metal container, smaller than the first. This one had no markings. Inside was a series of sealed cassette tapes, wrapped in wax paper, and a folded piece of field stationery bearing only 3 words. Not all are gone. The tapes were transported to the federal lab in Bozeman. Their contents were later described, never publicly released, but reference enclosed documentation obtained by park staff. According to those sources, the tapes did not contain ranger observations. They held recorded conversations. Voices, 2 male, 1 female, speaking in hushed tones. The quality was poor, distorted by years underground and partial water damage, but several phrases were identifiable. They can't trace it. No IDs out there. He's been walking that ridge. Though none of the voices were confirmed, the implications were serious. Someone, perhaps Keane himself, had recorded people operating illegally in the park. Whether those people were mining, smuggling, or running some kind of backcountry operation was unclear, but their presence, tone, and content confirmed Keane's suspicions. The next question was even more troubling. Had they discovered him? Investigators considered the timeline. If the tapes were recorded during the days leading up to June 12, 1992, Keane may have returned to the shaft more than once. He may have been documenting a pattern, not just evidence, but activity in real time. And that final day, he went alone. In retrospect, it made perfect sense. No ranger would have taken another into what he believed to be an illegal site without proof. Keane had always followed protocol. He'd always kept things quiet until he was sure. But this time, the silence cost him. Back at Yellowstone headquarters, the newly recovered items were added to a locked evidence archive. No public statement was issued. The National Park Service marked the area as restricted for environmental instability and closed off adjacent trails under the guise of wildlife preservation. Privately, however, the case had changed shape. It was no longer a missing persons file. It was a suppressed incident, a hushed breach of federal land, possibly involving organized activity, possibly stretching back decades. There were no arrests, no names released, no criminal charges filed, but ranger briefings changed. Patrols were rerouted. Maps were quietly updated to remove certain access points. And a handful of veteran rangers, those who had known Douglas Keane, began to walk the old paths again, not in search of his body, but of anything else he may have left behind. They found small things, a scratched rock with a faded arrow, a carved decay on the underside of a fallen branch, a notch in a tree placed too high to be natural, signposts, breadcrumbs. But no man. The one thing no one ever found was Keane himself. Not a bone, not a thread of clothing, not a single confirmed trace of his body. The boots had been removed, the box left intact, the journal preserved. Someone, it seemed, had gone out of their way to place those items where they would one day be discovered, not destroyed. Was it a warning? Or was it Keane himself, anticipating his own end and choosing what to leave behind? Some believe he had escaped, vanished deliberately into the wild, leaving clues as a message. Others were certain he had been silenced. But either way, the man was gone. And yet, as one ranger later wrote in a private log, we didn't lose him to the woods. We lost him to silence. And silence in these parts is never natural. By the time winter settled over Yellowstone in late 1999, the park's winding trails and ridgelines lay buried under feet of snow, silencing even the whispers of Douglas Keane's reawakened mystery. Officially, the case remained open but dormant. Unofficially, it was closed in the only way such stories ever truly close. Folded into land, accepted but unresolved. Inside a ranger's office near Mammoth Hot Springs, Keane's metal strongbox sat sealed once more, its contents archived, cataloged, and boxed under evidence code 9206, YMPK. His field journal was preserved digitally, every page scanned and encrypted. The cassette recordings, especially the final one, were duplicated onto modern media, each copy tag restricted, internal use only. The tapes from the second container, the ones with unknown voices, were reviewed repeatedly by audio technicians. Despite heavy damage and background noise, analysis confirmed the voices were human and unfiltered. The accents were domestic. The discussion was coded, indirect, but consistent with people coordinating some form of unauthorized activity. Terms like night runs, trail signs pulled, and no tag left suggested evasion, not only from rangers, but from detection altogether. One voice, slightly clearer than the rest, had said a phrase investigators couldn't forget. He's got maps. That's not good. It was followed by silence, then a quiet, chilling conclusion. Take care of it. Though no direct names were spoken, the context was enough to suggest that someone knew Keane was watching, and someone had decided he needed to stop. Still, without bodies, witnesses, or hard IDs, no action could be taken. The law requires more than suspicion, even in wilderness. By early 2000, most of the personnel involved in the recovery and investigation had been reassigned. The area surrounding the discovered shaft was officially declared structurally unstable and off-limits to all but authorized geological surveys. Signs were posted, trails quietly removed from new maps, GPS markers rerouted. It was as if the Earth had decided to cover its own tracks. But not everyone let the story fade. In the spring of that year, a memorial plaque appeared at the trailhead of 7B. Not official, not approved, just a flat stone pressed into dirt, carved by hand. It read, "Ranger Douglas Keane followed the facts where others wouldn't." It was removed by officials within a week, but someone put it back, again and again. Eventually, they stopped trying to keep it away. Keane's family, his sister Marjorie and cousin Daniel, accepted the discovery of the boots, the journal, and the tapes as the closest thing to closure they would ever receive. A private ceremony was held at the base of Raven's spine that summer. No press, no cameras, just a few rangers, a circle of pine trees, and the sound of wind moving through tall grass. They left behind a single item, Keane's favorite field compass, still in working condition, placed inside a small cairn of stones, not as a marker, but as a message that he had known where he was, that he had not lost his way. Over the years, stories circulated, not in papers, not in public reports, but among those who knew the park's quiet corners. Hikers who claimed to hear faint radio static on clear days, even when no ranger patrols were active. Trail cameras capturing glints of light deep in the forest where no equipment was stationed. A boot print, once, found near the upper slope. Too large for most wildlife, too clean to be decades old. Of course, none of it could be confirmed. But the mystery remained alive, not because of what was found, but because of what wasn't. No final location, no cause of death, no conclusive timeline, just signs, notes, whispers, and a legacy. Because what Douglas Keane left behind was more than a trail. It was a message etched into the bones of Yellowstone itself. That even when no one was watching, he had chosen to. That even when others avoided suspicion, he had leaned into it. He followed the facts, documented them, preserved them, and in doing so, exposed not just a pocket of silence in the wilderness, but something larger, something that had existed for longer than most had realized. Though he was never officially declared dead, and his remains were never recovered, his fellow rangers stopped referring to him as missing. Instead, they said something else. He's part of the park now. Somewhere beyond the marked trails, beneath the trees where signal fades and maps blur, Douglas Keane's final footsteps remain, not in soil but in memory. A man who vanished, a truth that didn't.